you. You can tell by the bulletin and where we are and who we're going to be talking about. At least I hope you're tired. Everybody's not that tired, are you? Okay. Is this reviewing good for you guys? It's good to go through. Okay, we first looked at the fact that God can bring holy interruptions into our life. That He can stop and tell us to do something different than what we think. And He's looking for people who will say yes, the way Abraham did. God then brings divine astonishment. Surprise! They're not always wonderful. Sometimes surprises are not good to us. But just like He did to Sarah, He said, you're going to have a baby at 75. You know she was like, yeah, right. Okay, but she did. Heavenly presence of God. God is with us. The dream of Jacob is one where God says, I'm with you. I'm going to use you to fulfill my covenant with Abraham. God is with us. When you're feeling alone, and I got news for you guys, you can feel alone in a room full of people. When you're feeling alone, just remember God's there with you. I told people in my church, if they're sitting at home and they're feeling alone, all they have to do is call somebody. We'll come over and play games or eat supper or do something. I mean, nobody should ever feel alone. There's always people you can call and talk to. Miraculous provision. God provides for us. I've been thinking a lot about this. Friday, I decided to stop my math tutoring classes at my school because basketball camp is this week and everybody wants to go to basketball camp. And we only had 1 week after that, and they've done 8 chapters. I mean, you got to save something for what you're going to do in school. So we kind of called it quits. That means I lost my money. I don't have money coming in now. And then my first thought was, oh no, what are we going to do? Then I was like, no, God does miraculous provisions. Look at Ruth. He provided when they didn't think it was possible. So God will do for us too. We have the king's attention like Hannah did. Hannah was distressed and God yet heard and answered her prayer. So God hears you. You're not talking to a wall or a ceiling. He does hear you. He is there. I was talking to one of my children and I let them know, God hasn't moved away from you. You've moved away from God. He just isn't like that. We have unconditional love from God. We looked at David who blew it big time. There were consequences for what he did, but God was still willing to forgive him. God never stopped loving him. He was still a man after God's heart. So it's about our attitude, not necessarily our actions. God's concerned with what we do. He's more concerned with what our attitude is. Why do you do what you do? Do you play the piano so you can show off? Or do you play the piano because I've gifted you to do that and you want to glorify me? It's our attitudes that He's concerned about. Our actions will come together the older we get, the more we stay in His Word. We look at Elijah. It's all like God speaks. God spoke to Elijah. Remember the movie? Constantly He was speaking to Elijah. Told him to go to the brook, go to the widow, right? Constantly. The divine calling of Esther. That even though God is not mentioned in God in prayer and worship, and it's nothing a part of the story, we still know God had a calling on Esther to save His people. God has a calling on each of your lives. You're here for a reason. Joe is here for a reason that's different than my reason. It's totally different with you, who knows. But we're all here for a specific reason. God has something for you to do that He's gifted you to do. And the neat thing is, this is what I love about my church, is we need one another. If everybody was a deacon, who would there be to serve? Right? I mean, we need one another and everybody's unique giftedness. You put them all together, then you have a full working body, church. Something smells good. It's making my stomach hurt. Some questions. You ready? What do you fear? What are you afraid of? Me is small, closed-in places or really big crowds. Because I have claustrophobia. That's why I don't go Christmas shopping. I do it all online, or it's done before Thanksgiving. I can't stand those crowds. Drive me crazy. What about you? Anybody? Huh? People. Because of what they may think of you, what they may do to you. Okay. Some drivers. Like some drivers.
Really
Okay.
long, high bridge with lots of water.
Okay. Bridges and heights and water. I can understand. Somebody else, what are you afraid of? The police. If you were living right, that wouldn't be a fear. People in my church said they're afraid of being out of God's will. They're afraid of not pleasing Him. What else?
Losing loved ones.
Losing loved ones. Somebody fire. Miss Karen was very afraid of fire when her children were younger and in car seats. She was so afraid if the car caught fire, we wouldn't be able to get all 5 kids out of car seats in time. So that's changed, of course. Car seats are bigger. No, not in car seats anymore. Where do you find protection so that you feel secure? Where do you find protection? Bless you. Bless you. Wow. Don't throw it. Well, where do you find protection? House. What else? Or where else? Wearing shoes protects your toes. What about God? Can you find protection at church? You should be able to. You should feel like you're around a group of people who really care and who listen to what you're concerned about and who'll be praying about it. What about the Word? Can we find protection in the Bible? Big time, right? Okay. Has anyone ever protected you? Or can you explain? Has anybody ever protected you? No.
My parents,
Your parents? How?
like, they tell me not to do stuff, and then
Okay.
if I do it, then I know that they try to protect me.
The way your parents try to protect you and get you to do the right thing. Very good. What else? Huh? Jesus. Okay, the way He watches out for us. What about police and firemen? You can feel protected by them, right? Have you ever had anybody specifically protect you? I told you about that man who pulled me out of the water and saved me. He's definitely protecting me and saving my life. Jihoon? That's scary. Well, we're going to be looking today at Daniel. I want you to look at this picture carefully, okay? Look at it carefully. Look at the angel, look at Daniel, look at the lions. There's one major problem with this picture. What?
The mouths are open.
Okay, that's what everybody said in my other church.
Wasn't it not the angel of God?
No, it was an angel.
Wasn't it?
Just look at the picture. Look at Daniel, look at everything.
Not in a cave?
Oh, no, he's in a lion's
He
den.
looks kind of scared.
Okay.
And wasn't there 2 other people?
Nope, that's a furnace.
Oh, okay.
We're talking today about godly protection, and we're looking specifically in the 6th chapter of the book of Daniel. The fact that God protects us. Another way that God shows up in our lives to relate to us so we can relate to Him. You ready? I'm going to tell you. Let's talk about Daniel for a second. He survived captivity for more than 70 years. Daniel was not a Jew in Israel. Daniel was a captive. He was a Jew in a foreign land for over 70 years. In fact, it's believed Daniel died around 100 years of age. So Daniel spent more than half, most of his life, as a captive in a foreign land. Also, if you study the story of Daniel, Daniel was totally faithful to God throughout his lifetime, even though that meant it took him through several kings. He went through several kings. And you know, with a king, everything changes, right? Do you all understand that? In America, every time we get a new president, everything changes. So Daniel went through that constant changes, but even with all the changes, he remained faithful to God. Here's what's wrong with the picture. Daniel was in his late 70s to early 80s when he was thrown in the lion's den. The picture shows him as a young man. He was an old man. He wasn't young. Late 70s, early 80s. You can figure that out through history and the kings and all that it's talking about. So Daniel was not a young man, yet everybody thinks in this story he was. He wasn't. He was an older man. Here we go. You ready? Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 to 5. You got to read. You got to listen. You got to take it in. You got to participate, right? If you just sit there, boring. Participate. Daniel 6, 1 to 5. It pleased Darius to appoint 100 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them, so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities, that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him, because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God." What was Daniel's character like?
Honest.
Honest. What else?
He wasn't corrupt.
He wasn't corrupt. What else? Trustworthy. I love the way Miss Precious put it in my church. Impeccable. No blemishes, nothing wrong, just impeccable character. Interesting. What did his enemies think of him? And be careful how you answer this. What did his enemies think of him? They felt the same way. He was impeccable. They would like to have found something wrong with him, right? Because what they didn't like was the fact that he's going to become the head honcho. That's not fair. He's not even one of us. He's a foreigner. He has no right to rule over us. That's ridiculous. Well, we can't find anything wrong with him. Wouldn't it be cool if our enemies could say the same about us? In fact, it brings up the question, why were they his enemies? Why did he have enemies? If he was so wonderful, his character was so great, why did he have enemies?
They were jealous.
Jealousy. Exactly. Jealousy. They couldn't stand Daniel because he was so great. Do you have people in your life who get jealous of you? Maybe. If if we're living the way we should. We should. Right? Interesting. Let's go to verses 6 through 9. 6 through 9. So, the administrators and the satraps went as a group to the king. Chickens to go by themselves. They went as a group to the king and said, "O King Darius, live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, O king, issue the decree, and it will be put into writing, so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the laws of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed." So King Darius put the decree in writing. Ha ha ha! How did Daniel's enemies try to get to him? How did they try to get him?
They knew they just got to pray to
They knew he was going to pray because his character was impeccable. They couldn't get to Daniel any other way other than say, let's get him when it comes to his religion, his faith, his God. That's how we get him. Daniel chapter 6, verse 10. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. So what was Daniel's response to his enemy's plot? I don't give a flying rip. Let me ask you a question. Did Daniel know about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? The men that were thrown into the fiery furnace? They were his friends. Who was greater in his eyes? King Darius? The satraps and governors and administrators? Or God? And he said, whatever. I ain't changing. God is greater. Today, do you know that? Do you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that God is greater than anything you face today? You know it, but do you know it? This knowledge is different than this knowledge. God is greater. And please, do not think I'm preaching at you. I'm also talking to myself. I told you I have a very serious unspoken, several of them. God is greater. He is greater. We continue on. Verses 11 to 13. It's such a good story. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. Well, why did they know Daniel was praying? He was praying in front of the open windows. He didn't go inside. He did like he's been doing, facing Jerusalem that he always longed to be at, praying to God. So, of course, what do? So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or man except you, O king, will be thrown into the lion's den? Now, did they really not know? Please. The king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the laws of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah. Notice how they refer to him. The exile from Judah, not Daniel, the great outstanding man that you would have. Pays no attention to you, O king, or to the decree that you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. What do his enemies run and do? Tell the king. Tattletale. Right? Like little children, they go run to the king. Let me tell you what Daniel's doing. Have you ever had someone so out to get you that they never go? You're kind of young. You will find people in this world who have it out for you so badly, they never give up. Ever. They are relentless at trying to get to you. Daniel didn't worry. He still prayed. Let's go to verses 14 through 20. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men, went as a group to the king and said to him, "Remember, O king, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." Notice what the king said. May your God. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Notice how he refers to God. It's a little different now, isn't it? What do you think was going on with the king? What was happening? He was sad.
So looking at Daniel as an example, I just gave you, a little bit about that.
Ah, he was starting to think about this God. Daniel's example started to hit him really hard. Do you think he also realized what these men had done? Oh yeah. He knew what they did. He knew that they set him up. They used him, the king. Not a bright thing to do, is it? Not too bright to use the king as a pawn in your little game. He couldn't sleep. Do you think maybe he even prayed as best he could? His heart was wrenched. He runs. Has God saved you? Do you think maybe he even said, "God, if you are real, if you do exist, if Daniel loves you so much and Daniel serves you so much, if you're real, save him. Save him. And I'll believe in you too." What was he really doing that night? I think he was searching and trying to find out this God and understand it, like Jim said. His heart was heavy. Oh, verse 21 to 23. Love it! Notice, Daniel answered, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done anything wrong before you, O king." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. What went through the king's mind at Daniel's response? Can you imagine? Daniel, has your God saved you? Are you alive? Is he really the living God? O king, reign forever. What? Are you kidding me? He was pumped. Life-changing experience, wasn't it? And then what freaks you out is they bring him out and there's not even a scratch on him, a bruise, a puncture, nothing. As if he just went. Miss Karen said, I think he was petting them. Because they were so stilled by the angel that they were like pets to him. And he was petting them. I often wondered as a child if he leaned against them to sleep. Because you'd have that warmth in the fur, and then you'd hear the heavy breathing, and you'd be right? We don't know. It'd be fun one day to find Daniel and say, what did you do in there? What really happened? What was it like? Look at verse 24. This is the killer. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. These lions were so hungry. Somebody said, when God shut their mouths, he filled their bellies. No, he didn't. He just stopped them from eating Daniel. Because when they were thrown in, we don't know how many men, double that for women, add on at least another one for children. Before they all hit the floor, they were being devoured and chewed up and crushed and broken. They were some hungry lions. You were the hungry, hungry hippos. These were hungry, hungry lions. It's not good to play with the king, is it? He has a way of getting you exactly how you're trying to get somebody else. Think about that. Right? These men went to Daniel, devoured in the lion's den, and they were the ones who ended up being devoured. Be very careful what you think and do to other people. It might come back to visit you. What happened to the enemies who sought to destroy Daniel? We just said they were chewed to bits, broken, split, just jointed, crushed. Look, these are probably the most important verses of the story. Listen. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language throughout the land. May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. What happened in the heart of the king? It changed. I think King was saved. Because the same thing happened with King Nebuchadnezzar that Daniel was under. If you study the story with King Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar comes to calling him the one true living God. And you had to know, you've got to know this, he had to have accepted God as his Savior because he says, he is the king that will reign forever. He's the kingdom that will never fail. His power, his glory, his majesty, his rule will never end. And a king doesn't say that. Right? Imagine living a life so much like Daniel that the people who rule over you, the people in charge over you, are saved because of your example. And your enemies are put to shame. What's the lesson? There will be people in this world who are out to get you. Please know that. You're young and I'm not trying to burst your bubble. But there are people in this world who are out to get you. Especially if you're trying to live the proper life before God. Even other Christians will not like it. Because you will make them feel guilty. You will bring conviction into their life. Even though your enemy may seem big, huge, and numerous, there are always important people on your side praying for you. Daniel had the king praying for him. That's why it's important to have church. That's why it's important to come to church, so that you can share your concerns and your burdens, and other people pray with you. If some men and some men were praying for their grandparents to get saved, that's great. But when the rest of us join them, there's a lot of power there. You're not alone. Your friends and your God are bigger than any enemy that may come across your life. But things are beyond your understanding and seemingly impossible. They're seemingly impossible. God's there to protect you and remove the fear from your life. God is your protector. Just like Daniel came through the lion's den with not even a mark, you're going to come through life not even marked. He'll protect you. He will. But this is the secret. Are you ready for the secret? You sure? This is where the Holy Spirit jumps on your toes and makes you go, ouch. Here's the secret. Daniel lived a life that found favor with God first, and then God allowed him to find favor with men. Who are you trying to please today? Yourself? Someone else? Your parents? Or are you trying to please God? If you're trying to please God, hear this very carefully. Your enemies will rise up. We don't tell people that when they come to church, do we? We tell them, oh, accept Jesus, and everything is wonderful. Right? If you're trying to get close to God, you know you've got more and more trials and problems coming up. Because you've got to start acting out what you're learning and growing. That's the reality of Christianity. Again, I laugh when people say we have no backbone and no mind, that we need religion as a crutch to lean on. The hardest thing you'll ever do is dedicate your life to live for God and then put up with all the stuff that comes. But it's so worth it. And even though it seems impossible, God will protect you. That's another way He relates to us and allows us to relate to Him. He's our protector. Questions, comments, insults?